Hello. Um, this is the presentation from Enrique Santana for the World Education Project about Cuba. My name is Enrique Santana. I said it like I said it before. Uh, the overview of this presentation is going to be we're going to talk about Cuban culture, Cuban history, then we're going to dig into Cuban educational system. Then we're going to quickly talk about the role of control agencies, uh, government and religion groups. Then we could go to talk about the teaching career. And finally, we will make a quick comparison between US and educational system. Cuba is an island, is the 10th biggest island in the world, is a little bit south of Florida. It's short of 90 miles south of Florida. It's the biggest island on the Caribbean. It was a colony of Spain for almost 500 years. In 1492, Christopher Columbus arrives in Cuba and claims the territory for Spain. In just 30 years, the native Cuban population was almost exterminated. That meant that as soon as 1526, Spain needed to start bringing slaves from Africa. The Cuban Independence War was one of the longest one against the Spaniard Empire. In 1898, the U.S. government enters into the war between Cuba and Spain, and the Cuban Spanish American War begins with the actual sinking of the USS Maine in the port of Havana. In 1902, Cuban independence is signed, and the US ended the first military occupation of Cuba. Then it was a second military occupation in Cuba between 1906 and 1909, which swayed the Cuban opinion against the US government for this military occupation. That sentiment of resent for the second military occupation was used by Fidel Castro, who in 1953 started a liberal and populist uprising, leading to the triumph of the Cuban Revolution in 1959. The religion in Cuba was a colony of Spain for so many years that the Catholicism is the oldest religion in the country at this point. There's also a notable presence of Afro-Cuban religions, such as Santeria and Brujeria. Brujeria is also known as Voodoo. During the colonial period, significant Asian migration to Cuba introduced Buddhism to the island, and then during the Republic, which is between 1902 and 1959, European and American migration brought Jewish and Christian communities to Cuba. Music and dance. Since the 19th century, Cuba has been immensely popular and influential throughout the world. It has arguably been the most popular form of regional music since the introduction of recording technology. Cuban music has contributed to the development of a wide variety of genres and musical styles globally, particularly in Latin America, the Caribbean, West Africa, and even Europe. Examples include rumba, Afro-Cuban jazz, salsa, soukous, and numerous West African readaptations of Afro-Cuban music, such as orchestra baobab and africando. Spanish fusion genre, notably with flamenco, and a diverse rise of genre in Latin America. In the picture, we have a group of synthesis, with they mixed every other genre that they touch with some Afro-Cuban music. That can be from rock and roll to classical music, always with a touch of Afro-Cuban music. The Cuban cuisine is heavily derived from the Spaniard cuisine and also the African cuisine, like other many Caribbean cuisines. In Havana area, though, we also have Chinese and Italian influences due to the more recent immigration during the Republic period. Cubans have access to food in their daily lives through a ration card system that regulates what they can purchase, how they can purchase, how much they can purchase, when they can purchase. The arts in Cuba reflect the plurality of aesthetic conceptions brought to the island, particularly by the Spanish colonizers and slaves from Africa. Additionally, Cuban art has been influenced by European and Soviet era artistic traditions. About the educational system in Cuba, the educational system in Cuba is completely free from the beginning to the end. I mean, even the university is free. It's also heavily politicized. As a point that there's a saying in Cuba that the schools are for the revolutionaries. So if you are a no, if you are declared no being with the revolution of not sharing their ideas, schools are so called, and I'm quoting, not for you. Special education in Cuba remains largely segregated, mainly due to parents' choice. So let's point this out. It's due to parent choice. Now, special education encompasses much more than just school. There are over 600 itinerant teachers attending to more than 1,500 children, more than 500 special classrooms in either nursery schools or special institutions. Students receive educational support in regular centers at every level, as well as in education programs for young people and adults. These students have access to support teachers and other specialists who provide appropriate training in techniques, procedures, augmentative and alternative communication systems, and educational materials designed for students with disabilities. Nursery schools or daycares and informal ways. Nursery schools are educational institutions designed for early childhood education. They cater to children 1 to 6 years whose mothers are working and attendance is offered at a price. Some of these institutions also include kindergarten programs. Informal education options are available for children who do not attend any institution because their mother probably don't work and will directly enter school at the kindergarten level. Elementary school in Cuba covers years first to sixth grades. Students in first to fourth grade are known as Pioneros Moncaristas, is the first cycle, while those in fifth and sixth grades are called Pioneros Jose Marti. The Cuban elementary programs includes an Explorers program, which is very similar to Boy Scouts. It's just that in Cuba is heavily linked to the school system. In first grade, students experience two significant events through a year. First, they receive a blue kerchief that changes to red in fourth grade, and second, they participate in Ya se leer ceremony, which mark their achievement as readers. Students may be retained in second, fourth, fifth, and sixth grades if they fail their final tests. The typical school schedule runs from 8 a.m. to 12:40 p.m. Then you have a period of lunch and free time until 2:40. At 2:40, classes resume until 4:20 p.m. Secondary school encompasses middle and high school. Secondary schools in Cuba covers grades 7 to 9. At the end of ninth grade, students make a math and Spanish test to be placed on a provincial list, which determine their eligibility for a spot at a technical school or high school. In seventh grades, students must begin their work component on their education, which involves spending a month working and living on a state farm or staying at home and working in a factory. Secondary education in Cuba places a strong emphasis on the development of life skills and also starts the component of separating the people in Cuba. Because all education in Cuba is for free, the Cuban government places a strong caps to enter university. That's why the emphasis on life skills. The second part of the secondary education is the high school or technical schools. Technical schools would be compared like a 2 year college degree in the US. Just in Cuba, start in ninth grade and you study there for 4 years. So you do your high school plus one extra year of education. But it's all mixed in a technical school. So you get graduated at the end of the 4 years. You can be graduated as agronomy, chemical technician. That was my case. Construction specialist, accountant, etc. Those students have brown uniforms, as you can see in the pictures. The high school consists of grades 10 to 12. There are 3 years. During these 3 years, students prepare for university. This period also marks the beginning of the military training. In 12th grades, students are required to take a placement test to define their eligibility or not to enter a university. At the point, the male population, if they enter the university, they have to go to the military for 1 year. If they did not get into a university, they need to go to the military for 2 years. Those are the students with blue uniforms, as you can see in the picture. The university in Cuba, as I said previously, is for free, although, like every step on the education in Cuba, heavily politicized. University programs typically last from 5 to 6 years and encompass all the theory and practice needed for students to succeed in their chosen fields of study. Upon completing the program, graduates are required to work for 2 years in a position designated by the government at a minimum wage. That is the so called social service. Eh, If you come straight from high school, you will most typically get into a 5 years program. If you come from a technical school, like it was my case, you will most likely go into a 6 year program to cover for all the missing parts that high school students, the normal high school students, they related to that career you're entering in. The control agencies, the government and education in Cuba. The Cuban government controls all the education through the Ministry of Education that centrally controls all the education in the country. Private education is forbidden. One of the most significant accomplishments in the Cuban educational system was La Campaña de Alfabetización. It was a literacy campaign in 1961. It lasted for 8 months, and that initiative dramatically reduced the illiteracy rate from 30% to nearly 4% in just 8 months. It was a populist government. It is a populist government still, um, but the literacy rates at that point went from around 70% to 96%. The religious groups and the education in Cuba. Right now, the religious groups have no involvement at all whatsoever in the Cuban education, as the entire educational system is state controlled and secular. Prior to the Cuban Revolution, though, the Catholic Church played a significant role in education, with many religious institutions providing educational service. Also, there were private schools at that point. However, after 1959, the government confiscated all school buildings and institutions previously operated by religious organizations, thus ensuring a secular educational system controlled by the state throughout the country. To become a teacher in Cuba, the Cuban national hero that you can see in the picture, Jose Marti once stated, anyone can teach, educate only those who are living gospel. In Cuba, educators often work with minimal materials, lacking access to printers, lacking access to internet. Most visual materials used in classroom are crafted, handcrafted, or handmade. To become a teacher in Cuba, individuals must complete a 5 years program at a university specializing in the science of education. Additionally, professional practice begins as early as the second year of the program, allowing aspiring teachers to gain hands-on experience throughout their studies. Let's make a quick comparison between the US and Cuba educational system. Children out of school in primary per 1,000, Cuba is ranked 43 with 2.49, while United States is ranked 47 with 5.64. Um, there's no homeschooling in Cuba. There's no private schooling in Cuba. The compulsory education in Cuba is up to ninth grade, while in the United States it's up to 12th grade. It has been discussions in Cuba for as long as I remember, for about 20 years of opening up the compulsory education, but hasn't been signed in a law. The government is spending in education proportion from the GDP in Cuba is almost 30%, 13%, while in US is 5.6%. There's one difference, and as a GDP in Cuba is way lower than the United States. The literacy of total populations in Cuba remains very similar to what it was after the literacy campaign in 1961. And at that point, it was 96%. Now it's 97%. That gives you an idea of how strong the campaign was. And after that, it was just the populist campaign. While in the United States, it's 99%. The primary education teachers per 1,000 populations in Cuba is 7.87, while in the United States it's 5.49. There's one thing that I have to notice that is that in Cuba, these are the graduated teachers, not the teachers that are actually working right now in education. Same goes with pupil teacher ratio, that in Cuba is 9.06, and in the US is 14.29. In the case of Cuba, is related to graduated teachers. Pupil ratio in secondary in Cuba is 8.4, and in the United States 14.4, 14.5, sorry. Uh, Again, in the case of Cuba, is against graduated teachers, not about teachers that are actually teaching now. The gender ratio in college and university in Cuba it's 168, while in the United States it's 140. That gives you an idea that in Cuba more females are the males are accessing to the university. The reference that I used for my presentation was USA Facts, the Ministry of Education in Cuba, and the website Education Stats for nationmaster.com. Thank you very much. That has been my presentation about the Cuban educational system.